Every single day I'm hearing of more and more people out there buying or looking for their first time homestead property, and it makes me so excited. Being a landowner for me symbolizes that higher level of personal responsibility, better food to eat, and just overall more independence. However, before you sign on that dotted line, there are some really important things to consider, and these were some of the #1 factors we took into account when we started shopping for our homestead many years ago. Okay, so the first thing to consider, and this may seem a little obvious, but hear me out, know what you're planning to do with your homestead, or at least don't box yourself in. I see a lot of folks making this mistake. They start a little too small, or they don't take into account how their homestead dreams will grow over the years. Remember, chickens are the gateway drug to a whole lot more. So when we bought this property in 2008, there was no way we could have known all the different aspects of homesteading that we'd be into in 2021. We have expanded far beyond what we ever thought possible. And I'm really glad we bought the property that could at least be the blank slate that would allow us to expand into all of those dreams and goals. So even if you're not exactly sure what homesteading will look like for you over the next few years, give yourself plenty of options. So one of the most important things that we took into consideration when we were shopping for a property is the covenant situation or any homeowners associations that were associated with where we wanted to live. You can buy the most perfect homesteading property in the world, but if you can't keep chickens or goats or even have a garden in your front yard, it's not gonna work. So know what you're getting into. Now for us, we didn't want any covenants or any homeowners associations whatsoever. And that might not be necessarily the right path for you, but definitely know the rules before you buy. And especially look into limits on number of animals or any outbuilding restrictions that they may have in place, because take it from someone who's been there, done that, your outbuilding count will definitely grow over the years, even if you don't think it will at the beginning. The next thing you definitely want to consider, and this was a big deal for Christian and I when we were shopping, is water. I have heard of folks almost buying properties or looking at properties where the wells were known to go dry, or where they maybe even had to continually haul in water. And I don't know, everybody's different, guys, but I wouldn't touch those properties with a 10-foot pole. Water is crucial to keep your homestead flowing, literally and figuratively, and you want to make sure you have a well or a potential well that can handle the load. You also don't want to be dragging hoses or hauling water for the rest of your life. That's just not a good time. So with this property in particular, when we bought it, it had 2 wells. One was the well that was being used by the house and the barn at the time, and the other is this well that was actually hidden in this lilac bush. It was the old original homestead well, and it was attached to an old cistern. And so we knew we wouldn't use it right away, but we had it in our back pocket for later. So a few years ago, we dug up the cistern. Unfortunately, it wasn't salvageable, and we're able to convert this old well with a little bit of work into a secondary place to do some of our irrigation for our lawn and our garden. Now, you don't need 2 wells for your homestead, but definitely take into account what the water situation looks like. If the property doesn't have a well drilled, know that they can be expensive, so put that into your budget. And also maybe talk to locals to make sure there aren't issues with wells running dry or low water pressure or some funky things like that. Oh, and one more thing to consider, and this isn't a deal breaker, but just know about it, is where are the hydrants placed? Now, you can definitely add more hydrants as you expand your homestead, but in those first few months and even years as you're getting off the ground, you want to have some hydrants in convenient places, or at least position your new gardens or your livestock pens in a place that are easy access to water. When we bought this property, there was 1 lone hydrant outside, and so we had a lot of hoses going a lot of directions to make sure everything stayed watered, and it worked okay, but just know what you're dealing with before you sign on that line. The next thing to take into consideration is what sort of power do you have available to you on your property? And it does make a little bit of a difference as to whether your power lines are running overhead like ours, or if the power is coming from a transformer, maybe out on the street, and it's rolling in underground to your house. None of those are deal breakers necessarily, but it's good to know what you're dealing with, especially if you plan to add more buildings with electricity, or you need power for heat lamps or for hydrants. And if you're not sure, you can always have the power company or an electrician come out just to help you know how hard it would be to put buildings in various locations and run power to all of those. Next up, outbuildings and fences. And this barn was actually a huge selling point for us when we bought this property. It wasn't in great shape, it was yellow, the roof had some issues, and it was full of trash. But we knew we at least had the bones to get us started, and we had somewhere for our animals to get out of the weather while we worked on the myriad of other projects that were needing our attention at the moment. And I feel like outbuildings are a really big bonus for the average person because most people don't have a lot of construction skills. And when you're first moving to a homestead, if you have at least a shed or some sort of outbuilding that can keep your chickens or your goats or your cattle warm and dry during the winter while you work on the house and everything else that needs to be addressed, that's a huge bonus. And the same goes for fences. When we bought this property, this fence line didn't exist. And it was the very first thing we built to make sure our horses, just didn't run away. So we put some cheesy barbed wire in here and have upgraded it over the years. But at least for the most part, we had some perimeter fence to get us started, and we're able to build from that point on. Remember, when you're doing any sort of project, homestead or not, it often takes a little bit longer than we often plan for. So I like to give myself plenty of margin to make room for all of the unknowns that can pop up when we're building and creating. So another big deal is your weather and growing seasons. And I'm assuming you've probably already thought about this if you're shopping for homesteads, but it can make or break your success. So a lot of folks talk to me about moving to Wyoming to homestead. And of course, my first thought is definitely do it, let's be friends. But I have to be honest, Wyoming isn't the most ideal place to start a farm. We have severe weather, we have long winters, our growing season is really short. It can be done here, I'm living proof of that. But before you move to a place like Wyoming or just any place new, definitely know what you're getting yourself into first. So today, you might notice a little bit of wind noise in my microphone, but this is actually what we would call a completely still day. Like, we barely even consider this a breeze because the wind blows here all the time. And maybe you noticed, or maybe you didn't, all of the doors to my outbuildings are faced south or east. And that's very strategic because if they're faced to the north or the west, they will literally blow full of snow in the winter. So it's just those little things that if you move to an area and you're not aware of those details can cause you a lot of heartache in the long run. So it doesn't have to be a deal breaker, but just know what you're getting yourself into. So all in all, even if you're the most prepared person in the world, there's always going to be some unknowns, and that's totally okay. I think that's one of the best parts of homesteading is that it will teach you things you never thought possible. And yeah, you're gonna make some mistakes, and that's just how we learn. So I'm so excited for you as you take this new plunge into homesteading. I can't wait to see what you end up with. Speaking of crazy weather, if you wanna see what it's like to survive a record-breaking Wyoming blizzard, check out this video.